Welcome to this WDPI Autism webinar on self-regulation. I'm Daniel Parker. I'm the Autism and Family Engagement Consultant at the Department of Public Instruction. I'm going to be joined today by Susan Stokes, who is an Autism Program Coordinator in CESA 6.
So as I said, I'm Daniel Parker with the Department of Public Instruction, and I don't really want to do too much take time introducing myself, but I am the Autism Consultant at DPI, but I do want to let Susan have a chance to say anything she would like to say about her role with CESA 6 or working with students with autism.
All right, just quick background. I'm a speech-language pathologist by trade. I've been in the field of autism for over 30 years now. I've been working as an educational autism consultant here at CESA 6 for, oh my goodness, almost 20 years now. And I am the program coordinator here at CESA 6 for the autism program.
So today, we're going to be talking about some evidence-based practices in terms of a lot of the research, a lot of the information with self-regulation. We do have a lot of good evidence-based resources and ideas to share with you. And I know that with self-regulation, unlike some other practices, talking about evidence-based and self-regulation is a little different. Do you have any kind of comments on that, Susan?
How I look at using evidence-based practice for self-regulation, it's using all of those focused intervention strategies like that the NPDC has listed on their website, visual supports, video modeling, social narratives, all of those very focused interventions can be utilized to teach self-regulation skills to our students with ASD.
Fantastic. And so we'll be talking a little bit of a review of those. As well as some really specific self-regulation strategies. I'm not going to go over the terms, but I like to, a good universal design is making sure people have access and understand the terms that we're using. If you have questions about anything we're saying throughout the day, a term we're using you're not familiar with, just type it right there in that question box, in that chat box. Some of the ones we might refer to the most is AIM, Autism and Internet Modules. It's a website that has some great free resources. And some of the things like 5-point scale and some other interventions, you can actually find some videos and some information on the AIM website. The other is the NPDC ASD, the National Professional and Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorders, who identified several interventions that are evidence-based for students with autism. In terms of self-monitoring and self-regulation, what would you, Susan, how do you kind of define self-regulation? Because I haven't found one specific way to talk about self-regulation.
I consider self-regulation, number one, recognizing signs of stress and anxiety, and then secondly, figuring out, all right, what are strategies that I can put in place to lessen stress and anxiety?
Perfect. And then the other piece of that is self-monitoring, which is a little different. And I don't know if we're going to get into self-monitoring so much. But we'll talk later about when you teach a self-regulation strategy, ideally the student is learning how to do that independently, knowing when to do it, initiating it themselves, having the resources and tools to do it themselves. Self-monitoring may be appropriate for some learners to help them kind of keep track of how that intervention is helping them. So we may or may not get into self-monitoring. Most of the discussion today is going to be on self-regulation. A couple assumptions before we get into talking about the strategies. One of them is just everyone self-regulates. I mean, this is not something specific to students with autism or students with disabilities or students that have sensory needs. In some way, we all self-regulate. The other one is, and this is an important one, is that the skills we're talking about today, and I would say almost universally, almost all of the techniques we're talking about can be taught to students at all developmental levels and all age levels. Would you have anything to add?
No, absolutely. Anytime I do trainings, all the strategies that I share, even though we are focusing this on autism, I always say this works for everyone, whether they have a disability or not.
And our hope is maybe some of these strategies, I know it's been true for me, the more I learn about certain self-regulation strategies, I've actually used them in my own life.
Absolutely.
For the benefit of myself and the people around me. Another piece, so we're actually going to ask you just really quickly to think about this, so it would kind of prime your thinking. So type your ideas into the chat or question box. What self-regulation strategies do you use to relax or reduce stress for yourself? Let's keep this G or PG rated. But go ahead and just type in some ideas, and we'll respond also so everyone can kind of see some of the answers that you're thinking about. We'll just take about 15 seconds to do that.
Okay, some of the ones that people have written into the question box, chat box: exercise, chewing gum, coffee, which is what Daniel's using right now, I can tell you, music, walking, singing, biting a straw. I thought that one was very interesting. Reading, deep breathing, quick meditation, shaking leg. I see that all the time when I do trainings. I see people where their legs might be going 100 miles an hour. Playing with hair. Somebody has water. Oh, this is a great one. A glass of wine. Walking the dog, power nap. I can tell you my best way for self-regulation is running. I'm a big runner. In fact, there are days that my husband will even ask me, have you run today? So that's always a clue for me. Oh, I must not be self-regulating very well.
So thank you all. I've kind of responded all for many of those, but we'll pass along those as we move along. So that's great. Great ideas here. So we all self-regulate. Another assumption that we want to make clear up front is just thinking about, many of you are probably listening to this because you have students that have difficulty self-regulating. And when you have difficulty self-regulating, you're going to find other ways to release your energy or behavior in a sense. So if you're not self-regulated, you're going to be more easily frustrated. You're going to have difficulties. And one of the orientations that I really find helpful is if we have students that have behavior differences and difficulties, is really be thinking about those behaviors as unskillful, and our job is to teach more skillful behavior. And I use some words, I'm using those terms from Mark Sweet from Disability Rights Wisconsin, who used those in a presentation I saw once, and I've used those since then. And I really like that idea because when we think of students who have difficulties with behavior, our job is just to teach them more skillful behavior. And teaching self-regulation is one of the best ways to help students learn more skillful behavior.
Absolutely.
So another piece of this, self-regulation actually fits in. These are two slides I use often, and I'm not going to go over this first set of slides or this first group, but when we talk about students with basic needs, sensory and movement regulation is definitely a big piece for students with autism. I think universally, students on the autism spectrum struggle with some movement needs and needing to learn different ways to regulate their sensory system. In addition to that would be that piece around relationship with caregivers. So please keep in mind a lot of the interventions we're going to talk about today are going to be most effective if you have a strong relationship with your student. I always like to ask this, Susan, what do you find is really important? What do you like to see in a program for students with autism that might be a generalization or universal?
I always focus on like 3 primary areas to start. Teaching and direct instruction, teaching skills in social relations. Self-regulation is right up there with the social relations, and then thirdly, communication. And I'm always like, if we can address their needs in those 3 primary areas, all right, we're going to have a student whose anxiety is lessened because they have better ways to communicate to us, better ways to understand our communication. They're going to have a better sense of processing all of the confusing social information that's out there, and then they'll also have a way to modulate that increased stress and anxiety. Of course, we use many different evidence-based practices to teach those skills. Certainly, again, a number from the NPDC.
So it is also important to remember, when you think about autism, a big piece of it is that if you've met one person with autism, you met one person with autism. So if you're using some of the strategies that we're discussing today, you really need to think of how is this strategy going to work best for this individual student. So if you're using, we're going to be talking about 5-point scale and square breathing and relaxation and different apps. And those things may work for all of the students that you guys are working with, but they may need to be implemented in different ways, different formats. And maybe have to have a little twist for that specific individual.
This is where I say you all have to be flexible thinkers, and take the ideas and strategies that Daniel and I are sharing and consider how you can apply those to meet your students' individual needs, because we're just sharing lots of different ideas that, you know, could be applicable for a number of different students, but we never say one strategy meets the needs of every single one of these students.
That's right. So let's get into some definitions and connections and the why and we're going to start with the why around self-regulation. So, you know, just as a background, anxiety and stress, which are kind of the, I guess maybe the outcomes of the inability to self-regulate at times, is one of the outcomes. I mean, they have been associated with autism since the first definition from Kanner's definition in 1943. Certainly, stress and anxiety is a big piece that can contribute to self-injury, excessive routines, difficulties in relationships.
This is something that I feel like I say almost every day when I'm out in schools, trying to help people understand that inconsistency is the most consistent characteristic of autism spectrum disorder, because this is very confusing for many educational professionals when one day they might see their student come in, you know, walk right down to their locker, hang up their stuff, go into class, do 25 math problems, good to go. Next day they come in and they're struggling just with even walking down the hallway. So I always like to use a balancing the tray analogy to help educators understand, you know, at any given time there are many different things on the trays of these kiddos. When they walk in school in the morning, first thing in the morning, we have no idea how full that tray might already be. And throughout the day, we tend to load up that tray, you know, again and again and again until it finally dumps. And with autism being a neurological processing disorder, you know, certainly these students can have a lot of anxiety in relation to those neurological features and characteristics. So, you know, the most that we can keep that tray relatively clear, again, through direct instruction in self-regulation, visual support, you know, social relations, etc., we're going to see a better regulated student and more consistent student. Another
Just little piece of information that I have found definitely can assist some people in their thinking is I used to work out at the Groden Center in Rhode Island, and they do a lot of research on stress and anxiety, and they actually did some studies where they looked at the resting heart rate of people with autism and people without autism. And they found that in some of their students and studies that many people with autism had a higher resting heart rate than people without autism. And if you think about when you are stressed, when you are anxious, what happens to your body physiologically? Your heart rate goes up. Your body has a reaction to stress and anxiety when it's under it, and all people do. But if your resting heart rate is already higher than neurotypical people, you're going even higher beyond that threshold when you become anxious and stressed and upset. So it's just an important kind of reminder that, and maybe to me it's kind of like, oh, that I get now why you see students who, if a 1 is calm and a 5 is a total meltdown, why they seem to go from 1 to 5 so quickly. So it's just good to keep in mind. There's a lot of very famous outspoken self-advocates with autism. Temple Grandin, probably the most famous as well. If you ever get a chance to look up John Elder Robeson, his stories are amazing, fantastic individual. But those are some quotes off of their websites or books that they've talked about stress and anxiety being a big factor in their lives and still that they live with. In addition, there's kind of that kind of fight or flight, and I actually heard someone once say fight, flight, or freeze. I like that.
I usually say fight, flight, or fright.
Fright?
Response.
Oh,
yes.
fright.
Fright.
That's good. It's just kind of that kind of basic human instinct that when you're under stress, you know, you have all these things happening to your body, and people usually either run, take flight, they act out, and some of our students do have some, you know, either self-injurious behavior or injurious behavior towards others, or they just freeze and they just totally shut down, and that could look like crying and those types of things. So self-regulations can assist with all of these. This is just a quick graph of that Groden Center study. The top line on the graph is the people with autism's resting heart rate, and the bottom is the neurotypical. This is a bumper sticker that June Groden from the Groden Center shared with me. I just thought I always like to share that when I can. It's just a good sticker to remind you think you're stressed, try having autism. So let's talk a little bit about some causes of stress and anxiety. I mean, certainly there's many. Some of the ones that I would say have come to the top of my thinking in the last 5 years is this piece around hidden curriculum, especially for those students who may not appear to have the physical symptoms of disability, but have more of the difficulties with hidden curriculum. We're not going to go too much into hidden curriculum. I definitely would consider Googling it. Judy Endow and Brenda Smith-Miles are two people who have done a lot of work and literature in the area of hidden curriculum. It's that not understanding those hidden social rules that can lead to a lot of stress and anxiety. And as I've met young adults with autism or identify as autistic or having Asperger's, talking about, you know, that extra piece not making it easy with then being in school environments, just very difficult.
When I do trainings, some of you may have heard me use my iceberg analogy, and this is where I always talk about those tip of the iceberg behaviors that we see, you know, I feel are directly related to increased stress and anxiety, but what we need to do is look beneath the waterline, what's hidden, what's not real clear, not real visible, and that's all of those neurological features and characteristics. Those are going to be direct contributors to increasing the stress and anxiety and ultimately challenging behaviors in these kiddos that we support. So we've got a list there, you know, of a number of the different neurological features and characteristics, but I'm always telling people that's what we need to be considering in, you know, not just looking at the behavior, oh, he's hitting, oh, he's having a meltdown, oh, he's, you know, running out the door. Well, what's causing that behavior? What stress and anxiety is increased because of his autism?
And you know, you think about students with basic communication needs, if their communication device is only in one place during the day, or if maybe that communication device only allows them to say 20 different things, that would be very frustrating for anyone. So we have to remember that all of those things that Susan was talking about, we have to be considering those other causes of stress and anxiety as well. So self-regulation is definitely a piece of it, but there's a lot of other pieces in a robust program for students we need to look at. Some other pieces of that lack of internal control, punishment is a big one for students with autism. And when I say punishment, you know, all teachers, educators, adults, family members, everyone, I think we can make an assumption that you're listening and we do this work because we care about these kids. Mm-hmm. But when we are presented with a set of behaviors that's very difficult to navigate, we get frustrated. Mm-hmm. And if you think about the lives of a person with autism, the number of reprimands, the number of not being able to communicate what you want and then acting out in a certain way and then getting punished for that kind of acting out, that just adds to stress and anxiety. Misunderstandings around hidden curriculum and attributions and some of those higher level social thinking skills, bullying, all of those things can be factors.
And the punishment, you know, I always say that's going to manage the behavior for the moment, but it does nothing to truly change the behavior. You know, and that goes into looking at, okay, PBIS, what is causing this behavior and what proactive strategies can we put in place to truly change the behavior? Because we can punish, 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 and the behavior will continue. And that's where, you know, we say when you get into one of those vicious cycles where the behavior happens, we punish, behavior happens, you know, who's the slow learner? You know, so definitely keep that in mind.
I always say when we use those traditional behavior interventions like timeout, even reasoning or suspensions or removals, usually when they don't work, sometimes the reaction is to do them more often, more intensely, to where we're pushing the kids out. And for students with classic autism, that kind of set of behaviors, usually that they don't get suspended often, although. But for those students that have more of the hidden disability, it's actually more common. And we have to remember that if that student has a disability and they have a pattern of behaviors, we have to do something proactive.
Absolutely.
So self-regulation fits in nicely there. And just continue to remember, like all of this piece we just discussed, if you have a neurology that is more predisposed to stress and anxiety, then you are at times going to behave in a manner that is stressful and anxious. And depending on how people react to that, and especially if they react negatively, we're just causing more stress and anxiety. And it's just this ever-increasing loop. So hopefully self-regulation is going to be a way to cut off that loop a little bit and channel our efforts and our energies in a more productive way.
And I've noticed, too, not only people around you react negatively to your stress, but if people around you react with increased stress and anxiety themselves, and I've seen that many times in the educational setting where a child has significant stress and anxiety, it's resulting in challenging behaviors, and then the people around them are also become extremely escalated, and that just exacerbates the problem.
Definitely. And we're going to be talking a little bit about co-regulation throughout, so I'm glad you brought that piece in there. In terms of need for self-regulation, we're really, the goal is to teach internal self-regulation. Although some of the things that we can be doing, we're probably providing for the student, the ultimate goal is the student uses these skills on their own.
Definitely.
The other piece is this can be very cost-effective. You know, you're teaching lifelong skills for learners here. And this is just my attempt at graphics here. Some of this information and ideas come out of the idea of positive psychology, where, you know, traditional psychology, we're trying to get a behavior to zero. So a student's shouting out at class, how do we get the student to stop shouting out? A student is running down the hallways. How do we get the student to stop running? Well, positive psychology it didn't work, but it kind of flips this notion on its head. That guy was supposed to start upright and turn upside down. In any case, but positive psychology says, well, what are attributes of people who don't have a lot of difficulties in life? What are attributes of people who are happy and manage stress well, and what techniques do they use? So the idea here is kind of thinking, what can we teach a student to do again instead of what not to do? That's the big idea. So if you think about those attributes of people with low stress, there's definitely a lot of pieces of that. So social networks and relationships, coping strategies, and we're going to be talking about the coping strategies and moving to that internal control today. So if I had to ask you just, Susan, why do you like self-regulation? What would be the off your top answer?
To me, it's one of the most critical life skills that we can teach these students, because they can, have a high IQ, be highly verbal, but if they can't self-regulate, they are going to struggle tremendously in life. And I always tell teachers, this student can graduate valedictorian of their class, but if they don't have self-regulation skills, they still aren't going to go very far. And to be honest, I have been very concerned about some students that I'm fearful they're going to end up in our jails. I'm very fearful they're going to end up in the legal system because they don't have adequate self-regulation skills, because we haven't taught them those skills.
And to go along with that, I know that one of my mantras from a gentleman named Philip Lazarus, who's the president-elect of the School of Psychology Association, talks about academics can get you a job, but social emotional keeps a job. And we know if you talk to our young adults with that identify as autism or autistic, they will tell you that the academic pieces for them aren't always the challenge. It's the tolerance, it's the community building, and some of the social soft skills that are the most challenging to master, and especially if they were not prepared early on.
Well, and I think a lot of it is too, we're giving them direct instruction in that academic area. I mean, that's school. That's what we're focusing on, and that's not part of school curriculum self-regulation. So if we're not making a focused effort to teach them skills in that area, they're not learning these skills by osmosis.
And I would jump in to add as well, especially coming from DPI, if you think about students being academically ready and to take in the information, feeling less anxiety, feeling related, knowing how to cope with anxiety and being resilient, if you have those skills, you're going to be able to excel even higher academically. We actually know that students who come to school stressed and anxious for whatever reasons, they almost, any teaching that is happening is just not even being as effective as when they are regulated. So it's just really a foundational skill that does improve academics as well. So it's a big piece of that. Some other pieces, we already talked about the students' interests. The occupational therapist, would you have anything to add in there? I know that I've had some great experience in my career working with OTs in developing sensory regulation kind of systems.
Well, definitely, because a lot of times what's contributing to the stress and anxiety can be sensory processing differences. So, OTs to me are such important members of the team for our students with autism spectrum disorder, to look at that sensory piece, as well as we know activities that involve deep pressure and heavy work tend to be very regulating and thus calming for our students with ASD. So again, I love getting the OT's input in those areas.
And I see, we also have in here is that when you're teaching, you're not teaching when the student is having a meltdown. And the great example, and you may have used this too, if you have ever been in a heated argument with a friend or a significant other, and they put their hand on your shoulder and just say, just relax. Doesn't really work out that way, does it?
No.
So, why would we expect with a student, just because we are an adult, a parent, an educator, an administrator, someone of authority, just because they're a child and we're an adult, that they would respond any differently when we try to get them to, when we tell them to relax or calm down when they're upset.
And I always say when we teach this, when we teach any student any skill, their optimal mode for learning is when they're calm. We don't teach students to read when they're stressed out and anxious. We don't teach them math. So, I mean, the same thing applies whether it's self-regulation, social relations, communication. So, but it's very important to keep in mind because I've been in some districts where students' anxiety is increasing, and that's when folks are trying to use strategies like the incredible 5-point scale, or let's work on deep breathing now, but they haven't taught the deep breathing when the child is completely calm and regulated.
The other piece here is visual supports are huge in terms of teaching students in general a lot of different skills, but with the self-regulation, that prompt. And why is visual so important in teaching self-regulation?
Well, because, number one, we know that's the strength way of processing and learning for all of our students who are identified with autism spectrum disorder. So when they see that visual, they see that information, they can process it. It's there for as long as they need to process versus trying to come up with that skill or strategy kind of off the top of their head.
So a lot of the information we're going to be showing you is combined with visual supports. And then also with visual supports, that would include video modeling as well. Correct?
Absolutely.
All right. One additional tool you may consider, and I had permission from the Groden Network to use this, and it's in the Google folder. There's a stress survey, and basically this is used as a functional behavior assessment interview. And the Groden Center uses this for all of their students. They're a group in Rhode Island, again, that I worked with. And they do a stress survey for all their students so that the teachers and educators and families can know what is stressful for these students and what areas do we need to help develop supports around. So if they're using social narratives like which are similar to the Carol Gray social stories or imagery or other interventions, they kind of have an idea of where to start out with in what are they going to help students with. And just to give you, this is a screenshot of kind of what that looks like. And you can see they have a whole bunch of different items, things from receiving a present to having a cold to being touched. And they kind of have adults who know the child, so this could be a parent, it could be a caregiver that has a close relationship with the student, fill out these stress surveys, and it just gives them some, information. And then they can also look at this over time and see if students are improving in their ability to feel less anxiety about some of these areas. Interestingly, being told, given a reprimand and being told no were the #1 pieces of what they find overall. Waiting is also very difficulty. Noise and sensory stimulation are there as well, but just a little extra pieces of information there.
And I have a quick question for Daniel that some of you might be thinking as well. Where can we get our hands on a copy of that? I mean, is that stress survey like a document that we can download and just utilize?
I put a copy in the Google Doc folder, and you can always email me as well if you want that. I've been taking that everywhere I go now because I just find it such a nice little tool. Another way to think about using this too, some of you that use Incredible 5-point scale, you can even just look, and we'll talk about that in a second, but you can just look at some of the items on here and it might give you an idea of some things to ask a student to identify on a 5-point scale if it's stressful for them. So it can be used in a variety of ways.
But they can access it through the Google Docs.
Through the Google Docs, email me, I definitely have permission to kind of pass that along. So a couple pieces as we finish up our kind of discussion of the why and setting us up for talking about specific strategies. Modeling, so important. And I'll give an example of what I mean by this. Certainly modeling by teaching, but if you are a parent or a family member or a professional or an educator who occasionally gets stressed at work, working with kids, if you take a couple deep breaths and do some square breathing, if you use a regulation technique that can be used that the student can see you using to de-escalate, it has a powerful effect. I know that I was a classroom teacher in Chicago, and I would occasionally get stressed out, and I would just take a couple deep breaths, and the students first would stop and look at me, and what is he doing right now? And it really kind of just showed, and it also calmed me down. So using self-regulation when you become stressed around children that you're trying to teach to is valuable. Also just modeling it in situations throughout the day and showing them what it looks like is important as well. And that can include video modeling, videotaping peers, others.
Definitely.
The other piece, and I've heard more and more people talking about this idea of co-regulation, and we brought that up earlier. And another piece of this is when the student is anxious and upset, this is not the time for teaching. This is the time for co-regulation. Meaning that if you think about it, when the student, think of it as like a temperature gauge in the room. When the student is hot, when they're having a meltdown, when they're throwing, screaming, crying, if that's the case of how the student presents themselves when they're kind of having a meltdown, we need to calm down. We need to, if the student's not harming themselves or others, if they're not harming themselves or others, we need to sometimes take a step back, maybe sit down in the room. Maybe use Sherry Moyer. I don't think I put them in this presentation, but she has some slides called Magic Statements. She has some ideas on what to say to a child in a meltdown. It's from the Eclipse Model book. And they're just things like they acknowledge that the student is upset, but they tell the student that I'm here to help you. I see you're upset. I'm here to help you. You know, when you're calm, I want to help you.
And I've also said to teachers, if you find yourself getting anxious and escalated and upset as well, it's okay to tag out, all right? Because, I mean, I have been in those situations where it's like my anxiety is heightened and I'm having a hard time regulating my anxiety. So, you know, I'm going to tag myself out and somebody else can come in who's at a much calmer state than me to help, you know, diffuse this child.
And it'll give you a second to just take some breaths. Maybe use some imagery and visualize what you're going to do when you go back into the situation and what you're going to say to the student if you need to say anything. That's another piece with co-regulation. We probably don't need to talk so much.
When it comes to talking, less is more.
Yes. So just keep that in mind. We won't be talking too much about what to do from this point on when a child is in a meltdown. Any final tips for that, for co-regulation?
No, I always say, because I always get asked questions, well, what do you do when they're in a meltdown? And I say you have like just a couple of things you can do. Number one is safety, you know, keep that child safe and everyone else safe. And secondly is you try to calm that child as quickly as possible, whether it's using their high interest areas, whether it's using some of these self-regulation strategies that Daniel and I are going to share. But when they're in the throes of a meltdown, those are really, I believe, like your only two options at that point. When they're building up to the meltdown, you know, that's when you have so many different, you know, choices that you can make to help prevent them from going into that meltdown.
And this is just a quick graph kind of showing modeling. It's a Venn diagram, modeling and co-regulation. They both can help teach they're both beneficial to assist teaching and also beneficial for the adult. But one, co-regulation is more when the student's kind of stressed and anxious, what we do to help bring the student down. And the modeling is more what we can do when we're stressed to model these strategies and show that they're effective, as well as just model them in general to help teach. So let's jump into the self-regulation strategies, and we are going to start out by just asking you a question, just so we know what you're already doing. If you could type in any self-regulation strategies that you are teaching your child, your student, your clients, however you identify the people that you are working with, your significant others, whoever you are working with to help regulate, what are some things that you currently teach? And go ahead and type them in there, and we'll take about a 20-second break.
Okay, some that people have shared: pushing a cart on an errand, taking a walk, like a bathroom break, deep breathing, using the incredible 5-point scale, listening to music, eat a snack, yoga, fidget toys, wobble seat break, stop, tuck, think, and breathe. A lot of deep breathing, regulated breathing, sitting, standing posture. 3-step calming, count to 10, squeeze hands, rub hands, cleaning. I like that one. Go for a heavy, or go for a walk, heavy work, listen to, the iPod, take a break, a lot more deep breathing, me moves. There's a number of things that you all are already using. Daniel, I think we can just stop right here.
Yeah, we're good. You guys can teach us now. No, these are all great strategies, and hopefully our goal too is to show you some additional resources from some of these, because some of these we're going to hit on, and some of them we're going to try to expand on some different ways to use them as well. So it sounds like we have a pretty advanced group. So the first one we are going to start with, we're going to talk a little bit about, we talked about direct instruction when calm. We're going to talk about some relaxation strategies. And the big one here, a very simple one, is just teaching students the home base and that area to calm down. So if you want to jump.
Yeah, we're going to, Daniel's going to show a little video clip here in just a second. But I always say, if you're teaching a student to self-regulate, to calm down, then we need to identify some spots, some places for these kiddos to go where they can calm. Because sitting at their desk or sitting in a lunchroom or out on the playground or during a passing period are not going to be optimal environments where they can implement some of these strategies that we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk, Daniel's going to show you a video next, but I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about these, what we call quiet areas, safe spot, home base, chill spot. I always say, I don't care what you call it, you just can't call it timeout, because that's not what it is. It's a time away versus a timeout.
So I'm going to go ahead. This video that I'm going to show you is from the Organization for Autism Research. And the sound isn't perfect, so bear with us a little bit, but you can find this as well, and I give you the website there, and I'll put this in the recorded webinar. I'll have the clip a little bit clearer, and I'll actually put the clip in the Google document as well. But this is it's going to talk about 2 strategies. It's about 3 minutes long. It's on antiseptic bouncing and home base, and these are some just general calming strategies. So I'm going to get that set up for you.
Once the teacher sees signs of a coming meltdown, it's vital that he or she promptly intervenes, but in a way that doesn't intensify the situation. Teachers can use distraction or calming techniques to help the student regain control before the onset of a full-fledged meltdown.
I think what's hugely important is to have a process in place where you as a teacher know what this child needs. You know the signs if there's a problem, and you know the resources that you then have to use to incorporate into your routine.
One intervention strategy teachers use effectively is called antiseptic bouncing, which involves separating the student from a stressful environment in a seamless and inconspicuous way.
He is picking on his eyebrows. That is the signal. You go to him and say, Mr. Johnson needs a box of Kleenex. Please take it to him. Now, Mr. Johnson doesn't need the box of Kleenex, but he knows on occasion a box of Kleenex will arrive. We want him to get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, say hello to the school secretary, peek into a couple of classrooms. He then delivers the Kleenex and then makes his way back to his classroom. During that time away from the classroom, he's been distracted and he is calmed.
Another proven intervention is sending a student to a home base, sometimes called a cool zone.
A home base is simply a place where the student can go to decompress. It is not escape from work. It can be a speech-language pathologist room. It can be a resource room. It can be a counselor's office.
I'm going to give you 5 minutes on this timer, and I'm just going to give you some space, okay?
Usually we have some type of calm down plan already set in place, or somewhere for them to go where they don't need to focus on whatever work that we're doing at that moment, to just regain their composure and calm down.
All right. So again, a home base and that antiseptic bouncing are just kind of formats for where a student can go and what they can do, where they might be able to then engage in some of the other self-regulation strategies we're going to be talking about next.
Okay, just a couple of other things with the quiet spot, home base, safe area. You know, I always say the location, what's most important is that it's seen as a positive environment by the student. And a lot of times, I mean, I have some of my students give input, all right, what is best for them? Because what I might design as a calming place for them might not necessarily be calming. I had one student say, it's too light, it's too bright in here, it's too light in here. I also look at what are they seeking out. I had a kiddo that was constantly going under things, under his desk. He'd run out into the pod, go under the table, pull his hood up, you know, over, close everything out. So I said, this is going to be easy. Let's just put a blanket over this little table here, and this can be his quiet spot. This is what he's seeking out. Also, a couple of other important things. You're going to need to provide instruction to these kiddos in how to use these quiet spots, home base, when they're calm. All right, because I've had students that when they're escalated, that's when we start out using these. So we're sending them to these locations when they're escalated, and the student automatically then makes a negative association with that because they think they're being punished. So what I do initially is I just put it right into their schedule several times throughout the day, and part of that instruction is teaching them to set a timer so that they realize when I go here, it's not that I go here for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I miss math, science, you know, everything else. There's a time constraint for this, but that initial instruction when they're calm to access these locations is critical. Once they have, you know, once they understand the purpose of this, then when they're escalated, that's when you can start providing some direction using some of those visual supports. And to be honest, the student will probably be heading there anyway before you can even direct them, because they realize this is a positive place. This is the place I need to go to get away from it all, to collect myself, and to be able to get back on track. But that instruction and use is very critical, and also making sure they understand the time constraint. So a lot of times we just have like a time timer right in there, and we teach the child, you just pull this little lever over, you know, and to me like 5 to 10 minutes, absolute, you know, max. You know, that should probably be suffice. And it can be, you know, any safe areas can be anywhere, all right, multiple. One of my students he said, let's go around to every environment. He goes, I want one in the gym, I want one in art. And I'm like, great. You know, in the gym, we just taped off a little square area in the gym. It was still in the gym and out in the open, but he knew that was his safe spot. So again, it can be in any environment.
Again, you know, that I love that you just gave an example of just creating a visual boundary for that student, where for some people it may just look like tape on the ground, but for that student it had a much deeper meaning of a very calming, safe place. This is my area. And probably for some students in the gym, I wouldn't be surprised, but for that student, just knowing that that's there and seeing that it's there can help relax that student as well.
Absolutely. For these kiddos, knowing that they have, you know, access to these spots, you know, these locations, I think it does help keep their, you know, anxiety lessened. And we also talk about, you know, the home base can be universal, all right? It doesn't have to just be, you know, specific to this one, you know, student. I have a lot of teachers that that will say, you know, this is explain kind of the purpose for the whole class, and, you know, anybody can have, you know, access to this. Sometimes we have to identify that the child with autism spectrum disorder does have priority, all right, in the use, you know, of that quiet spot.
Definitely. I love the idea of making things universal, because at first everyone wants to kind of check it out, but after a while you find the students who really, in a sense, need that are the ones that are accessing it. And it can tell you a lot if you have other students that want to access it. The other piece that I love that you mentioned is that having the student be a part of developing what's in that space. Because some students may want total quiet, some may want headphones with noise, the lighting, the types of chairs, certain types of books or interest things that they, fidget toys. There was actually a college student who was it was a disability resource center person working in a university setting at a disability resource center, told a story about a student who in a culinary class at a technical college, you know, was approaching a meltdown, came to the disability resource center person and asked them, you know, okay, I'm upset, and they would try to figure out, well, what calms you down? Found out that what calmed down the student, the strategy they used, was watching shark attack videos. And so what they did is they arranged for an iPad or a tablet to be used in the classroom where the student could watch a shark attack video when needed to reduce stress, and it just instantly calmed the student down. And the instructor for the class actually was so open to the accommodation that he would draw a little shark on the blackboard, and just when he noticed the rumbling signs of the student, could just go over and point to it, and that calmed the student down. And we're talking about, this was in a college class accommodation. It's pretty impressive, I thought.
Awesome. The high interest area, though, I just want to say, too, exercise caution, though, because with some of these kiddos, they're high interest, they can become so fixated on them that if they have those high interests located in their quiet spot, I have some kiddos in that's why they want to go to the quiet spot to get, so there's always a fine line. I always say there's a fine line, and it varies from student to student regarding what's calming to them, what's regulating, and regarding what's like way motivating and can even be escalating, because some of their high interest can end up being, more escalating to them. So you do have to look at the individual student's needs. If you put like a high interest in there and they're able to calm and then handle coming back out, of that quiet spot and get back on their schedule, that's great. But if they're not, if it's going to cause, I always say, if it's going to cause a worse problem having that high interest in there, then don't even put the high interest in there. Look at some other strategies that are calming, and it will vary. I mean, I have some students, music is so calming. I have other students, they're so fixated on music that when they go there, that becomes their fixation, and then it kind of loses the whole effect or purpose of that environment.
And you mentioned the visual timer too. So anyone that's not familiar with that term, visual timer, just look it up, timer, visual timer. It actually, there's different ways of presentation for those. Mostly now they're all electronic on apps or computers and things, but they're just a nice visual way for students to see the progression of time. Here's a couple pictures of some quiet areas.
Yeah, and usually most of the quiet spots are pretty bland, all right? It's not like that there's very much stimulating. This is pretty basic, beanbag in the corner with a weighted blanket, just in the corner of the classroom. This is a cool little chair. The IKEA company makes this chair. This would be more so for early childhood, pre-K, kindergarten. But there's like this little shield, as I call it, but it's a net that comes over. It's a little egg shape, so it kind of like cocoons the child. Doesn't take up any room at all. So I've had some students, early childhood students, right during like group time or calendar time, they can still stay in the group, but we just kind of put the little shield down, and that just gives them a little bit of space so that they can self-regulate. I
actually used this back maybe 6-7 years ago with a student, and it wasn't a student with autism. It was a student's parents were going through a divorce. He had some other predisposition for some mental health difficulties, and he was like in 3rd, 4th grade, and he would have total meltdowns, and he would just go into a safe spot in one of the rooms where this chair was, and you just pull that over with a book for 5 or 10 minutes, and then he could come back to class, and it was just so nice. It was such a support for him.
This is just an example. This teacher just used PVC piping, and it's like a little pop-up tent that they sell, but she just made her own PVC piping, took little curtains there. She said sometimes the student would just sit in there with the curtains open, and other times he needed those curtains closed, and in the bottom were just a couple of bean bags. This is real fancy beanbag in the corner.
And some of you may have questions about seclusion rooms. We want to point out that this is not seclusion rooms. These are places where the student chooses to go, has access to go, and comes out of, is not being forced or to go into or physically prevented from leaving. That's a whole different topic and area. This is student choice, student ability to move in and out of these areas.
Good point. This is just an example of a high school student. He just had a designated chair and table right outside the student services office, because I always want people to know this is not just for little kiddos. I have middle school, high school students that I don't want them having a meltdown in the cafeteria during passing periods. So we define locations, at the middle school, high school level as well too.
So the next piece we're going to talk about, and again, feel free if you have questions about any of the strategies as we move through them, just type them in the box and we'll find a good time to pause and address any questions you have. This next piece, we're going to talk about some affirmations, relaxation, regulated breathing, and visual supports. I'm going to start out talking a little bit about some movement activities. And I actually got a call the other day about deep pressure in high school. And as students get older, the staff was feeling less comfortable with doing some of the more physical pieces. How have you worked around that with like occupational therapists, or who is trained to do some of the deep pressure types of pieces? Or what are some other options if people don't feel comfortable, for families or parents, for any reason, of doing those types of interventions?
Well, for deep pressure heavy work, like at the high school level, definitely I always want to work with the OT, but we always try to look at what are functional tasks and activities. You know, could it be that they're going to, you know, carry the cases of, you know, soda or water or whatever, you know, to load up those machines? Are they going to do recycling? Can they help the custodians? I have an excellent resource, our students going into like the weight rooms, all right, and lifting weights. That has been, you know, awesome for a number of my students, you know, at that high school level. So really looking at what are functional activities that they can do, and again, that we're not imposing upon them, that they are able to do on their own and still get that necessary input for self-regulation.
And sometimes for some students, you might give a choice of two things. I remember actually was in a school, and it was a high school, and the student was clearly a little hyper, was saying some comments to the group that weren't really socially appropriate comments, and the staff just very calmly said, you know, I noticed that you're a little anxious. Would you like to run stairs, or, and I can't remember what the other option was, and the student just went out in the hallway. It was a student who was fairly independent and just went up and down the stairs like 5 times, came back, and was definitely more able to join the group. Doodling is a great one. There's actually a great TED Talks on doodling. If you want to Google or web search, whatever your browser favorite is, doodling and TED Talks, T-E-D Talks, there's a really nice talk. It's not about special education, but just about the power of doodling, how it actually helps turn on your brain and helps you think. So that's a good one that we put in there.
Someone just said, we have a student that loves to vacuum. And gosh, I mean, you couldn't talk about any better way to get some of that heavy work. Someone else had just asked a question about suggestions for when a teacher opposes doodling, which Daniel was just talking about, even though it is very important to the student for self-regulation. I'm assuming, I'm guessing it must possibly be a gen ed teacher. You know, I've had some students that, you know, they're doodling like all over their worksheet, so then you can't even see. So we've just given them like a doodle pad, you know, so to keep it separate. They can still doodle, but, you know, we're going to define where they can do that doodling so it's not in their workbooks, on their worksheets, in their textbooks or whatnot.
A couple other ideas. I think data can be powerful. So if this is a student where doodling is allowed in other instructional areas, and you can even do a little mini research study, do some instructions, show that the student is able to engage in doodling and look at their performance, and if they do as well or better, and if this is a student where you think doodling is reducing the amount of removals from the classroom, I would say that's pretty powerful. And if you had a team meeting and presented that type of data, I think it would be harder for someone not to jump on with that. Of course, you can always write things into the IEP, and once they're written in an IEP, they are a legal document. So there's an option as well. And IEP teams can be as specific as they would like to be when they design interventions.
Most definitely, and especially if you feel it's an intervention that the student benefits from and that folks aren't adhering to it, I'm always like, let's just write it in the IEP then.
Yep, if it's in the IEP, then it is then part of what has to be done. So we're going to talk about some more of these me moves in yoga and some of this pieces coming up here. I wanted to start out just talking a little bit about attribution and the role of positive affirmations. And sometimes when I do a full day workshop on this type of topic, I show some of the Saturday Night Live skits of Stuart Smalley doing positive affirmations, if you remember that from the 80s or something like that. But in any case, they sound, at times they can sound, it's just something we don't think of as students making positive affirmations about what they're good at. And And I put this into self-regulation. I kind of fit it into this topic just because I think it kind of fits in broadly as an intervention. But if students can say positive things about them, there's research and if they're hearing positive things about themselves, we have research that shows that improves how they feel about themselves. And how they feel about themselves is going to also help them be more successful and less anxious and less stressed.
This is an area that I definitely, Daniel bringing this up, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is something that I forgot about and that I haven't been using very much. I remember years ago, I heard Tony Atwood speak, and he talked about using a brag book or having our students keep what they call a brag book, where they're writing down, what are the good, like write down 2 great things, that happened today. So again, trying to get them to focus on, those positives. But it's definitely something that I haven't thought about in a few years until Daniel just mentioned it.
Yeah. There are things you can also roll into social stories or social narratives. Put an affirmation in there. So whatever the condition is, I walk into a noisy hallway. I know that I can walk down the hallway calmly. And just saying that affirmation, I take a few deep breaths and I walk down the hall. When I go into the teacher's room, it's nice and quiet. Or whatever the social narrative is, but having a positive affirmation in there, that's something I know the Groom Center does when they look at their affirmations. So they're just, we're just talking about, and now you need to make sure they're true statements. So if a student's really not good at something, saying that they're really good at it, but if you say you can handle it, I can handle this, I can do this, and make sure you practice these things in situations that aren't the hardest thing for the student. So you're not going to pick the absolute hardest part of the day and the thing that's always really difficult and try to use positive affirmations. Just like any intervention, you're going to start with something that you have a very strong idea is going to be likely to succeed, so the student gets the concept of it, kind of like with home base. You teach it when the student is calm with something positive, and then just kind of then you can kind of shape that out. I am going to show you, these are just a couple examples of some affirmations. I'm not going to read through those, but I have some in the presentation. And you want to just be modeling those, help them identify positive affirmations. You could do this also. Don't think just because a student is nonverbal, you couldn't still do this. You can still model those affirmations. You can program those into their speech generating device so that they can choose to say affirmations, those types of things. I actually visited a school where they had the affirmations written on the wall in the students' kind of activity area, their independent work area. They had pictures of the student, and they had different things for each student, and they had some affirmations of what that student was good at, and they made little posters of it.
This is another great use of the evidence-based practice of video self-modeling. So where the student is seeing themselves, engaged in positive skills, positive behaviors, because I think so often we get focused on the negative, but let's use, that video self-modeling so it fits right with the positive affirmations.
We actually we're going to show a video of self-modeling here in a second, too, from the Grown Center. Yeah. So this is an example, this is a discrimination teaching. The only thing you have to be cautious of here, this is giving a student this is like a teaching scenario. So you kind of have some visual supports. You set up the stimulus or the setting event. The teacher gave Matthew some math homework, and you talk to the student about, what would you say to yourself in this situation? You have to be very careful with giving students negative comments. Those should not be part of social narratives and social stories 99.99% of the time. But for some students at certain levels, giving them these types of options may be more appropriate. So let's go ahead and so that's kind of my slide on thinking about that negative feedback. Instead of saying not doing something, even in your social narratives or social stories, that can actually that's like saying don't think of a pink elephant right now. We always traditionally want to be focusing on that positive. And we can think of other ways to say things like try this another way. And we really need to remember that we don't want to be using language that is just going to cause more problems.
And no, Daniel had being told no is a top 10 on the stress survey. So I think that's important to keep in mind too.
Yeah. A student who is doing some video modeling with with one of the people that they work with, and basically just to give you an idea, so the idea of this is the student is going to be watching a video of themselves doing some hand washing, and they're using this to do some positive affirmations, but also to think about, well, how the student's really good at this, so how do we build on that skill? So we'll show that video now.
Now you're going to rinse them off? Mm-hmm. Wow, perfect. Wow, you did a great job.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. We just watched you wash your hands? Yeah? Mm-hmm. And how good of a job do you think you did?
Smart.
You were smart. You're smart and you did a good job washing your hands. You watched yourself do it on?
TV.
On TV. Okay. You think you can wash your hands pretty good? Yeah? How clean do you think your hands got?
Nice and dry.
Nice and dry. They got nice and dry and they're squeaky clean. You were a good hand washer because we saw you do it right there on
TV.
On TV. Okay. Hey, I bet if you could wash your hands, what else could you wash and get it squeaky clean? Your face? You could wash your face and get it clean? How clean would your face be? Squeaky clean? That's great. So you're going to be able to do all these things by yourself. That's good. You did a good job. Thanks for talking with me today.
Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
So that's just kind of an example of a therapist who's showing a student, kind of walking them through a video of themselves washing their hands and just how to build off of that. And what an easy thing that is to do. And just something we don't think about doing. This next piece is on progressive relaxation, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I'm just going to show a couple videos, but I want to just make people aware of this. And I don't know if you have seen this, but mindfulness, relaxation, I am just seeing it come out of the literature and out of the woodworks, and not just for, I mean, not just for people with disabilities or autism, but for just all kinds. It's kind of becoming a very pop culture intervention just for people in general.
Absolutely. Mindfulness especially. I'm seeing so much. And like you said, just for anyone, you know, the mindfulness therapy, mindfulness strategies, but it is like, I think, a big buzzword right now, especially in the realm of anxiety and relaxation.
Yeah, it's a much more stressed population we have, probably. I think most people agree with. So progressive relaxation is been around for a while, and basically the idea is to teach students, and kind of a quick synopsis is it's based on some work by Joseph Catella and June Groden.
And that's a great book. I just want to pause Daniel for a second. That book's been around for a long time. I'm not sure when
like
it was.
The 80s.
Yes, when it was published. But I have that book, and I still reference that book. I mean, I think it's a great book on teaching relaxation, especially I think for some of our cognitively younger, I would say folks that are functioning at a cognitively younger age, you know, so not just for our students that are verbal and cognitively intact. So I think this is a great resource.
And I know at the Groden Center they teach relaxation to most of their students as part of their school day. They, you know, once a student knows how to go through the process, it only takes about 5 minutes to do a relaxation kind of session, and we can take a look at that. And we have done it with, I have seen it done with students with the most significant needs to doing it universally in a general education classroom with students who need some relaxation as well, and doing it with all students. So, you know, the big piece of it is teaching students to go through different body parts and to tense and relax the body parts. I would not start this intervention without getting the book or going to an additional training. I am planning on doing a webinar just on progressive relaxation within the next year. So if you're on my email distribution list, you can hear about that, and hopefully I can get June to assist me with that, June Groden, who did a lot of the research in this. But basically you kind of work from, and I've seen other progressive relaxation programs do this, you know, they talk about relaxing your eyes, relaxing your chin, relaxing your arms, but the way to teach students even with more significant disabilities is they'll have a student hold out their arm, and the teacher will kind of hold their arm not at a place where the student can injure themselves, and just kind of teach that student to kind of tense it and use that terminology like, right now we're tensed, it's stress. This is what your body feels like with stress. And then you count slowly down and you have them relax and release that tension and put their arms slowly down. This is kind of just a picture of that, tense and relax. So they're taught to tighten these and relax these large muscle groups, and they discriminate over time between tension and relaxation. It's often combined with a nice big deep breath at the end, so take a breath, relax. And so it is important, in addition, to kind of note that after a while you're focusing on the relaxation a lot more than the tension. So you're not doing a lot with the tension, you're more focusing on the relaxation. And you start to, once students kind of learn this kind of going through tensing, relaxing, being able to just stop and relax and feel their arms relaxed, you start doing it in different environments. So you do it walking in the hallway, you do it standing, you do it sitting in a chair, you do it in different places, with the idea that eventually they're going to be able to use this skill. So there's kind of an example in the different places that you do this. And again, I've seen this taught at all different ages. So I'm going to show a quick video here, again, of a student who has mastered this tension and relaxation. And this is going to go back, this video was taken a while back through the Groden Center, and so it references a student working at a job placement at Filene's Basement who's learned to use this in their everyday life.
Jay and Lisa have part-time jobs at a local department store. This provides great satisfaction for them, but also presents challenges. Jay, for example, is sometimes bothered by extraneous noise, like the rumble of a rolling trash barrel. Quite often, Jay is able to use the relaxation techniques to alleviate this stress.
I was so pleased when I went to see Jay at Filene's Basement because he has reached what I felt was the ultimate in self-control. It's taken us 8 years for him to learn self-control, but isn't that time well spent? Look what he's learned. He can go out and work with other workers at a department store. And when he feels anxious, he's learned how to identify what bothers him, like a loud noise. He's learned to be able to take a deep breath. He's even learned what to say to himself. That doesn't bother me, I should get back to work. And so the payoff in teaching that is enormous.
So right there you kind of heard them talking about using a relaxation technique. She said it took 8 years before the student could use it in a natural environment, but that student has that now skill for the rest of their lives. And this is a student who presented himself with significant needs when he was at that school. And we're not talking about 8 hours a day for 8 years, but 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day, teaching the skill, teaching the positive affirmations, and kind of rolling those together.
What I love about that video clip and what June had said, that it took 8 years, so often we're like, okay, they're not getting this, they must not have the skills to do this, maybe they're cognitively functioning at too young of a level. I feel like we give up, quickly on a number of skills for these students. So I love the fact that she says it took a long time for him to learn these skills, but they did not give up. They continued, to address them. So keep that in mind, not only with self-regulation, but in all of the skills. And then the second piece that I love that was addressed with the progressive relaxation that we need to keep in mind with all of these strategies is that generalization piece. Because Daniel and I keep talking about you want to teach these strategies when they're calm. And I'm telling you, they're going to learn this stuff when they're calm. And they're going to do great with you when they're calm. But the key then is applying these strategies in the environments that they need them, that are causing them to feel that increased stress and anxiety. So that generalization piece, that instruction, not just assuming they're going to generalize, because we don't assume with our students with autism spectrum disorder, and we also know they struggle with generalizing, so that has to be part of your instruction in self-regulation.
And I have another video clip that shows June doing a session of relaxation, but I will put that in the Google folder, and you can just download that after the webinar if you're interested in learning more about that strategy.
Okay, so for strategies, so far we've talked about positive affirmation, progressive relaxation. Now we're going to talk about using regulated breathing. This to me, these are easy strategies that I've had a number of students have learned really quick. We've used some visual supports to teach. First one, we call it the 5-finger candle blow. All right, I think if you skip ahead, Daniel, there's a little picture there. I kind of had those out of order. That's just holding up, 5 and blowing out each finger, pulling the finger down, whether they're doing it on the adult can model. I've had some students, we've made a visual support of a hand, and we've taped that on their desk, as a reminder for, oh yeah, I can do the 5-finger candle blow.
Would they do that does it matter if they do it quickly, or do they blow slowly, or is there a right or a wrong way to do it?
Typically, it's best to go slower, but I have some students that go faster, and they do it repeatedly, so to me it's like whatever's working, all right?
Sure.
So, I mean, the instruction is in the slow. You just don't want them to hyperventilate, or because that'll cause a worse problem. Another regulated breathing, Daniel's going to go back, is square breathing. I love this visual to teach this type of regulated breathing. And this is where, this is like printed off. When they're calm, we are practicing. Start on the green dot and move their finger up the square. Breathe in, count to 4. Hold, count to 4, breathe out, count to 4, wait. And we practice this, I have students, we will put this visual support, we might shrink it down, tape it on their desk if they're in elementary school, or put it on the outside of their planner or binder for middle school, high school students. I observed one of my students a few months ago, I saw him sitting in class, and I saw him tracing the outline of a square on his pant leg, and I'm like cheering, because I'm like, yes! I mean, that's what self-regulation is all about.
I have heard of teachers putting, for tactile, either using felt or sand, and having the student trace the square as they're doing the square breathing there. This is my favorite. This is the one I use the most. I've used this today. To just calm down and take a break. That square breathing is just really easy. I've heard of people using narrated PowerPoints where the arrows actually are animated, and you record the sound of a person breathing in, out, and holding. So there's a lot of creative things you can do with this.
And then the next regulated breathing is just figure 8 breathing, and while you're tracing the figure 8, breathe in, breathe out. And again, same principle, using the visual. I find the visuals help so much in teaching the skill rather than just trying to say, let's breathe in, count to 4, let's wait, count to 4. It gives them a visual to help regulate that breathing.
And sometimes that kinesthetic movement kind of can help as well.
Definitely. Let's talk about that.
So visual supports, I kind of chose a visual support to symbolize this. Visual supports could be can either help you with the success of your intervention. So I think the visual supports, another thing we didn't say with visual supports is that, when you have something that's visual, it's there. They can see it all the time. It's not just words that are in the air and disappear. You can point to it. You can reference it. The student can see it in their field of vision. Sometimes again, with many people with autism talking about thinking in pictures, even if they know where the visual support is in the room, it's a tangible thing that they know where it is, and that can cause reduction in stress right there. So the 5-point scale, why don't you kick us off and talk to us a little bit about what is the 5-point scale?
This is another visual support that I love for self-regulation. Carrie Dunn-Burren is the person that came up with this idea, and it's really looking at helping students understand varying levels of anxiety, starting at a 1, and what does it look like, what does it feel like, what does it sound like, and most importantly, what should they do depending on what level they might be at. Carrie developed it as a 5-point scale. I've had some students that we have gone with just a 3-point scale, because 5, that was just too much, so we've just gone with 3. Daniel's showing you some different examples here. Carrie Dunburn has a book. There's also, as Daniel said, a module on the Incredible 5-Point Scale on the AIMS website, so you can get some additional information. But, you know, these are just different examples. Again, very visual. The students see, you know, each level of anxiety as it builds. And with some of my students, they help create this. All right, they're the ones, I'm like, what does it look like and sound like when you're at a 1? What does it feel like? I can't determine what it feels like. So it's oftentimes very interesting what they share. And then we come up with together, what should you do? Okay, if you're at a 1, keep on keeping on, you know, all the way up to, you know, what you're at a 5, you know, what can you do? And this is, you know, not only an instructional strategy, but just like Daniel was saying earlier, you know, a visual that they can have ready access to. I have a student that there's a big 5-point scale like on the wall right next to his desk. All right, so that, and it's right next to his desk, so that he has, you know, constant visual access to that rather than trying to pull this off the top of his head. So again, that transient or that non-transient visual information there for him to process.
I know that if you go to the AIM website and go to the 5-point scale module, the video you'll see is actually Carrie doing kind of, it's almost like an assessment. She has a new student and she's sitting with there and she has a file folder, and on the front and back they have different pockets for a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they're all color coded. And she gives the student a index card that says something like riding on the bus. And they've already, you know, I'm assuming they've already gone through what is a 1, what is a 2, what is a 3, and the student says, oh, that's a 1. So that would tell them, oh, that's okay. And then she goes, losing at a game. And the student would say, oh, that's a 4. And it's a way, it was an interesting way, I thought, for her to get to know that student who was new to the school, because she said, eating in the lunchroom, and the student said, oh, probably a 4, but it's because I'm new to this school. And that was really, it just opened up a nice conversation, very visual, and then from there they can talk about these uses. And if you go to the Incredible 5-Point Scale website, people use this for everything. Yeah, it's amazing.
And also, I can tell you on the AIMS website, under resources, there are some templates, some 5-point scale templates, you know, so that, you know, they provide those right there for you, that if you want to print them out, you know, and start trying some different ones with your students. And again, different examples. The next example, this was a student, actually it was a high school student, but she couldn't read, and so we just put it in a visual format. You know, Disney princess, she loved them, so when she's at a 2, you know, it's like, think about, look at her Disney princesses. 3, it was typically when she became very auditorily sensitive. 4, that was for the 5-finger blow for the regulated breathing. And then, you know, when she's at a 5, it's like, you know, go to her quiet spot, you know, access her quiet spot. So again, it's not just for those students that can read or are verbal and more cognitively intact.
We had a question, what is balloon breathing?
Balloon breathing is similar to figure, it's regulated breathing. It's where the student is, and I've seen different variations for balloon breathing, where they're people are kind of moving their arms up. I'm doing it here for Daniel, you know, as they're breathing in, you know, kind of like making a balloon shape, you know, and then blowing out. I've had other folks teach balloon breathing as where it's just like you're blowing up a balloon, you know, like.
So it's imaginary blowing up, yeah. So either doing it with wide arm movements out to the side like you're a giant, you know, bird, or just blowing, like pretending you're blowing up a giant balloon. Great. Good question. I know that, you know, these are ones I honestly just made up. So talking about different strategies, again, making sure the students are part of this conversation, because they really need to be owning what this looks like. So there can be all kinds of different strategies. Some other ways to use this, I've seen and heard of teachers who have universally, like on students just come in and with a Post-it note or name card to say, how are they doing in the morning? So the teacher has notes like, oh, okay, so here's where people are at walking into the school, and you can modify what this looks like.
That kind of goes back to you then having a good idea when they come in the school, first thing in the morning, how loaded is their tray, all right? Because if they're at a 3, you know, wow, that tray that they're balancing is already pretty full, so maybe we need to do some self-regulation strategies to clear that tray off before we even start the school day.
This is a very PBIS one that I think many of you working in PBIS schools will see, like how loud should my voice be? That's very common. Again, you can use these 5-point scales and do narrated PowerPoints where people are hearing what it sounds like so that students can hear their own voices in these different situations. This is one, how much help do you need? So if there's an assignment, and again, the visual support. You know, a student may not have all of the skills where they will choose or even just be able to immediately have the habit of choosing or engaging in raising their hand and waiting and asking for help. What they might do is touch something on their desk and tap it that indicates that they need help.
And that's a really good point, because we know communication, I mean, that's one of the primary areas of difficulty for our students with autism spectrum disorder. So even our, highly verbal students, when they're stressed and anxious, they're not going to be good communicators. But if there's a visual support, like a 5-point scale right there on their desk, all right, that will help them to better communicate, where their stress and anxiety level is.
And then this is one, just throwing out there, it's actually self-regulation maybe for staff, where we talked about co-regulation. So I would actually, if I was thinking about this again, I would probably change this to a co-regulation. This is an example. I was up in CISA 12, and one of the autism consultants at the time said that they developed a behavior plan for staff. So when the student engaged in certain behaviors, they said, as a staff, as a team, this is how staff will respond, and they actually wrote it in the behavior plan. And there were concerns about staff being inconsistent and how they responded to certain students. They just wanted to get everyone on the same page, and so the consultant, this was kind of an idea they had. And of course, that number 5 is that immediate danger to a staff, peer, or student. That's harm to a self-harm or to another that is immediately going to happen, imminently going to happen. That is under state law, the only time you can use seclusion and restraint. So if you have a student who seclusion and restraint is something that is happening for that child or student, definitely think about writing out something with staff of what do we do in different situations. Because if the student's just walking around the room, pacing and cussing or yelling or crying, that is not a time when seclusion and restraint under the law is allowed. So, but what do staff do in that situation?
I like that.
So you could use this for co-regulation, where you come up with words staff say, proximity, what they do, things like that. And this is another one because I know it comes up a lot. Sometimes students want to tell you everything that's happening with other students. So this is just a 5-point scale of how urgent is this. Someone told me that they created that. I made these up again, so you'd have to make up your own that fit your student.
Individualize.
Yep. So this next piece, I use the term coping cards. I'm not sure where I came up with that term. I'm not sure if that's something the Groden Center used when I was out there, but we're just going to talk about other visual strategies that are really easy. So really it's, again, just having reminders that prompt a student to do this. We did not include power cards in here, but that's a good one too. The power cards, if you go to the Autism Internet module under social narratives, there's a great one on power cards. It's using a child's special interest, whether that's a cartoon or a person or a movie star or a singer or a parent or I don't know, it could be anybody, and having them kind of make an affirmation. And actually we do have an example right here of one. So here's one of Spider-Man that says, make a web with your finger on your desk. So is that the, explain that one to us.
This was a kindergarten kiddo who, of course, Spider-Man was the end all, and he had a lot of anxiety. So we had taught him how to just kind of trace, make like a spider web, all right? So he's just like tracing his finger, and we associated that with breathing, all right? So rather than square breathing, he's doing like spider web breathing. And then the one above, the Abraham Lincoln, this was a middle school student that could use these self-regulation strategies when he was totally calm, but he didn't utilize them. He didn't generalize those skills. So he loved Abraham Lincoln, absolutely loved Abraham Lincoln. So we put this picture of Abe Lincoln with a talk bubble coming out of his mouth, and we taped that like on the outside of his planner that went everywhere with him, so that his attention was drawn to it because he liked looking at the picture of Abe Lincoln, but it was also giving him kind of like a subliminal message of, this is what you need to do if you are feeling, a little stressed or a little anxious. So we're always trying to look at, what are their high interests, and can we use those to teach skills, whether it's social relation skills or even self-regulation. Okay, go back one more, Daniel. Okay, this is a visual strategy I've used a lot for self-regulation. I call it the communication problem-solving page. Again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about these students struggling with being able to effectively communicate when they're stressed and anxious. So, this would be individually designed for a student, because I have some students, the things that I have on this example wouldn't necessarily, meet their needs. But I always tell teachers, when they're starting to show those signs of anxiety, pull out this visual so that they can better communicate to you what they need, whether they're verbal or not. Because again, my highly verbal students, all right, it might be it's just too loud, but they're not saying to you, oh, it's too loud in here, I need my headphones right now. But when you bring out this visual, it definitely, whether they say it or not, but it helps them to more appropriately communicate to you what their needs are in the area of self-regulation versus showing you behaviorally, which is going to be their natural tendency, again, due to that heightened anxiety. The next visual support, this is something that I've used for generalization of skills. So these are some of the visuals, like the square breathing that you see there. Think about the solar system, because that was the high interest for this student. I think we had something like make lemonade, because we taught him like to squeeze his hands together. And we put all of those in a small kind of visual support format. We put it on, as you can see, that's a retractable key ring. So he would keep that like in his pocket. He kind of like had it latched onto his waistband. He'd keep those little pictures in his pocket. So then it became, when he was, in the out in the gen ed setting or at lunch or whatever, and he's starting to feel a little anxious, rather than trying off the top of his head to come up with some of those self-regulation strategies, he had those visual supports, and he could do it very discreetly. I mean, because they were small, he could just pull it out of his pocket, just kind of flip through some of those and put in place some of those self-regulation strategies in the environment that he needed to use them.
This goes along with kind of those ideas around imagery, and sometimes when we imagine relaxing places or thoughts, that can be extremely effective. So having that visual support and reminding students. And with the Spider-Man or the Abe Lincoln, with these power cards, what I love about it with staff, instead of saying what you might say when you see a student getting anxious is, oh, remember to calm down, or remember to do this, or which could cause more anxiety. Mm-hmm. But if you can say, hey, remember what Spider-Man says, or remember what, whatever the special interest is, my feeling is that that's more productive.
It's much more powerful, much bigger hook than you saying it. This was one of my high school students. He used this all 4 years of high school. He insisted every year he needed this visual, and he always kept it right on, taped on the outside of his planner. And I mean, he had this until he graduated. It was just an important reminder for him of when he was starting to get upset, what were different things that he needed to do. And next example, again, just another visual support. If you're getting upset, what are things that you could do?
And again, I know that not every student you would want to put out that no crying, no hitting. Because I have had some students who, once you say the behavior that they, that is more likely that they would engage in because they don't have a more skillful behavior pattern, that they just end up, it just makes it more difficult. They'd see that and they just start thinking about it.
And that's where, again, you look at your individual students' needs. And to be honest, I agree with Daniel. I typically try to stay away from no, all right, in any way possible, because I have had it just, come back to haunt us much worse. So. And
these are just some ideas I came up with that you could put any of these things on a coping card. Just some ideas. There's millions of things you could do. We had a question that came in, and I love that you are here to help me answer this question, because I hear this when I talk about why are break cards necessary to teach? Because I think some students, or not some students, some educators feel that, well, they're just going to always ask for a break then, and they're not going to get anything done. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I think first of all, it's instruction in how that break card works. All right, I mean that the student has to understand, and the break needs to be defined. I mean, I think that's the other problem we've had where we haven't defined what is the break. And I have students just think it means I'm going to get out of spelling, you know, for 10 minutes. But break, I mean, I think if we clearly define what it's going to be, whether it's go get a drink of water so that they know there's an end in sight, it's not just to get out of something. But I think that instruction piece, again, it's like everything that we've said all, you know, all afternoon, providing that instruction to them in how this works. I have had some students that have overused break, you know, because, hey, it's pretty, you learn quick. Wow, I use this break card and it's awesome. And we've had some students that we've used like a certain number of break tickets, you know, break card tickets or whatever when they've overused, you know, the break. But again, providing that instruction in what a break is all about and clearly defining the break. I mean, because I have some people just say, well, it's break, and I'm kind of like, well, what does that mean? You know, what, is it a sensory break? Is it a self-regulatory break? Is it a chill space break? What do you mean by that?
The other piece that I know I feel strongly about is if you are considering the use of a break card for a student who otherwise will get that break by biting someone or hitting or tearing up something or crying or screaming, really what you're doing is you're teaching more skillful behavior. I mean, you're getting out of the, you know, and if you do a functional behavior assessment, if you look at competing pathways theory of functional behavior assessment, if you look at functional communication training, which is a module on the AIM website, and Ellen Franzoni and I that works here at CC6 did a webinar. We're hoping to get that webinar link out to folks soon, the recorded link. But we talked all about that, and asking for a break and being able to acknowledge that immediately. When a student more skillfully asks you, hey, I don't want to do this, you have to acknowledge it. So if you do it, you have to. You can set visual timers. You can set parameters. And it gives you time to get away from the student melting down, and you're doing something more skillful. Now, that's not the end of it. That's not like, oh, we're done. Now we don't have to worry about this behavior anymore, because now the problem behavior is, why is the student asking for a break all the time? And that should lead you to, well, maybe it's the activity is not meaningful to the student. Are there things we can adjust? Maybe it's the lighting in the room. Maybe it's the way that the information or activity is being presented. So it gives you a chance to get out of that basement behavior, as I like to call it, that behavior that's getting the student removed from the classroom or the school or hurting people or themselves, and it gives you a chance to let them use something more skillful, because they need to learn how to ask for breaks in life.
Absolutely. Right? And as a speech language pathologist, you know what Daniel said, when they're communicating that and we are teaching them that skill, that honoring piece is critical, absolutely critical. And I look at some of my students that are not real effective verbal communicators, you know, all the language function of all done, you know, is similar to requesting a break. It's kind of like, I can't do this right now. And so I have students that if they're not an effective verbal communicator, they're going to use obviously behaviors to communicate that. And so if we can teach them a more functional way to communicate that, whether it's through an all done or a break card, all right, that's going to be, like Daniel said, teaching them to be, you know, more skilled. If we don't honor it, though, initially in that instructional piece, they're going to learn, okay, this doesn't work, so I'm going to go back to, you know, grabbing this person's hair and yanking on their hair or hitting them, because I know when I hit them, that really makes things be all done, and we stop the activity, and I get a break anyway. So
for a lot of students, they're missing instructional time no matter what. It's just it's definitely you're teaching a communication, and it gives you a chance to think of how you are going to engage that student in more meaningful instruction. So let's talk about apps.
Okay. I wish I could show you some, but we don't have time. If you're coming, though, to the ASW conference, I'll give a little plug. I'm doing a breakout session. I think it's called Don't Worry, Be Appy version 2.0, because I did it last year, and this is kind of like I'm doing it again, but of course it's going to be different apps. Dr. Mark Bowers, he's the developer of some apps that I absolutely love for self-regulation. His full-fledged app is called SOSH. And when you type SOSH into the App Store, there's going to be some other things that come up. Make sure it's the one that's developed by Dr. Mark Bowers. This is a costly app, I'll tell you that much. He does have a light version, which is a free trial version, so you can look at it to see. But it typically runs anywhere between $29 and $39. But this app, I'll tell you, is one of the most complete self-regulation apps I have ever seen. The Shredder is also an app by Dr. Mark Bowers, and the Shredder is part of his original SOSH app, but so many people loved the Shredder that they wanted the Shredder, but they didn't want everything else that came with the complete SOSH app, so Mark Bowers marketed it as something separate. The Shredder app is like either 99 cents or $1.99. You know how prices change. I love this app. This is where the student can type in things that they're stuck on, whether it's negative thoughts, feelings, fixations. They type it in, or, and then they use their finger and they drag that thought, and it goes into a paper shredder, and then you get all the, as that thought, that visual thought gets shredded. And I've had some students, we start that first thing in the morning. We open up the shredder, they shred some things, and we might need to shred some things, throughout the day. The Voice Meter app is also part of the SOSH Complete app, but it's another one that they pulled out to sell separately because it was so popular. And this is just a vocal volume monitoring. So, as the student is talking, it's showing like a meter, all right, that's showing is their voice at a too loud level, an appropriate level, or too soft level, which certainly some of my students have as well. The next couple of slides, I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are just, again, some awesome apps. Take a Chill, Stressed Teens, fabulous for middle school, high school students. We're going to show you Me Moves, a video here in just a little bit, because Me Moves, I have a lot of folks that are using the videos for Me Moves, but I want you to also know there's an app for that. We just spent a lot of time talking about the 5-point scale. There is an app, of course, for that as well. On the next slide, we're going to talk about a curriculum called the Zones of Regulation, which, again, the person that developed this is going to be a full-day pre-conference speaker at the Autism Society of Wisconsin conference, but there is an app for that. There are a number of yoga apps out there, and research shows students with autism spectrum disorder that participate in yoga activities, awesome self-regulation. Tactical breather is a regulated breathing. So, you all know there are over 900,000 apps. These are just a few apps for self-management and self-regulation.
So we're going to show a video here of the Me Moves curriculum really quick, and this is going to be a video of actually it being used in a classroom.
So all it is an imitation of motor movements, geometric shapes, upper body, with this calming music playing in the background.
And the students are moving their hands to what they're watching on the video screen. And there's various levels of difficulty and different kind of patterns that they do.
This Me Moves program was developed not for students with autism. It's actually developed for anyone to use, because the research shows that a couple minutes a day, people participating in these Me Moves motions, that it tends to be very calming, very organizing, and very regulating. So I have a lot of whole classrooms that are doing this. It can be done small group. It can be done individually. And like I said, there's you were seeing the videos. There's also an app for that. I was sharing this information at a training I was doing at an elementary school a couple of weeks ago, and the principal said, "Oh, our first grade classroom does that." He said, "I love it." He goes, "I go in there," he goes, "and I do it for a few minutes," he said, "and I feel so calm after doing that." All age levels. There's people in nursing homes I know that they're using, Me Moves with. So it's just, I think, a pretty awesome self-regulation program, for anybody and everybody.
We did talk a little bit about movement activities and breaks, but just you had gone over those. Another one that might be on there is pushing a cart down the hallway. If you have students that have difficulty also with physical space of walking through visual boundaries, pushing a cart could be another thing that they could do as well.
Functional activities. We just talked about me moves. This was just, there's a lot on YouTube. There are tons of free little yoga. This is actually an awesome awesome video that I've used. It's kind of lengthy. It's about 20 minutes long, but I just put that link in there so that you all, could get a free example of yoga for kids.
And in a follow-up, I'll take all these links and put them in a document for you guys so you can have some of these. Some of the curriculums, I know zones of regulation, that is definitely a hot one right now. And as Susan said, the author, Leah, is going to be at the Autism Society conference coming up. I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah, me too. The zones of regulation, she's an OT. She developed this self-regulation program. But what I especially love is that the terminology that she uses, she pulled in some of that terminology that we use for social thinking. So like flexible thinking, expected versus unexpected behaviors. And it's a very visual, very concrete presentation of information. I find it, the How Does Your Engine Run program that was around forever, Zones of Regulation is a more concrete program I have found than How Does Your Engine Run, but definitely applicable for all age levels. So, it's very easy to provide instruction in this Zones of Regulation. And then Stop and Relax. This is just another relaxation training curriculum. I think it's a couple of slides. Next slide in. So again, it integrates yoga, psychology, and just some special education techniques. And we just included the website for that. This is an awesome workbook. It's a workbook that students work through to help them identify what are stressors, all right, and what are things that, and how do those stressors impact them socially, emotionally, and then what are things that they can do. So in the age levels between like 8 and 13. So my complete guide to staying cool.
And I added this one, When My Worries Get Too Big. Again, I think you find that's by the person who created the incredible 5-point scale, and it's just a nice little relaxation book for students who live with anxiety. Mm-hmm. So, we actually live in an exciting age right now because there's a lot of really good high-quality stuff out there for students and for adults and educators. So as we wrap up, there's a couple questions that came in, but just when you are looking at generalizing self-regulation, remember those steps again. We're teaching it, and then we are talking about when it should be used, because we're really trying to get students to internalize how they're feeling. One of the things we didn't add in here, and I saw Tony Atwood talk about this, though there's little watches that students can have that actually monitor stress and heart rate. And once they become anxious, it makes a little beeping sound, which then can cue them to engage in square breathing or progressive relaxation where they're relaxing different body parts or whatever it is. So there's actually some biometric feedback devices like watches that provide that. So you could just look those up online. But also looking at, for a teacher, if you're a teacher or an adult, sometimes, again, our words cause more anxiety, so holding up a cue, holding up a card, doing a signal that you and the student know that prompts the student to engage in a relaxation and trying to get the student to see that. Sometimes you can look at keeping charts to, show a student, and this goes along with self-monitoring, talking about, hey, how does it feel when you're using self-regulation? Talking to them about it being an accommodation or a support, and talking about how it's helping them. And then looking at generalizing. So definitely that communication between home and school, using regulation strategies out in the community, using them in different classrooms and different places is very important. With any intervention, a functional behavior assessment is going to increase the likelihood of success in intervention. So if you're looking at self-regulation today because of students' behaviors that interfere with learning, always recommend a good functional behavior assessment. Data collection is important, not only just for finding out what the outcomes are, but are we implementing it? You know, with self-regulation, that can be a little harder because there's probably a lot of ways to implement square breathing. But 5-point scale, you know, you might want to watch the video of Carrie doing the 5-point scale. You might want to go to the website or look at some of the books and the ideas behind that. Certainly with things like social stories, which is trademarked from Carol Gray, or any social narratives, there's actually do's and don'ts on how to use those appropriately, because you can actually maybe cause more difficulties by using some interventions. So that program fidelity is just all about making sure you are implementing something the way it was intended to be implemented. So some keys, what is a key to success for you, Susan, around using self-regulation or teaching self-regulation?
The biggest key, as we've said numerous times, is to, number one, recognize that you need to provide this direct instruction. I mean, that to me is the biggest key. And secondly is teaching this when they're calm, using some kind of a, whether it's the strategies or a curriculum approach, but to me those are the two biggest keys. Recognizing we need to provide them instruction in this, just like we're teaching them math, how to read, etc. And then again, providing that instruction when they're calm. And then I suppose thirdly is that generalization piece.
Yeah. For me, a key, it's more of a tip maybe, but the video modeling can just be powerful. So if you're videotaping the student engaging in the self-regulation, letting them watch that, if you have other students that are doing it using video modeling, I think video modeling will probably increase the likelihood of success of a lot of these. So we're going to kind of move along. I put the slide together on some key questions to ask yourself, you know, either at home or school or with your teams, families, educators, administrators. Talk about, you know, well, how does the student self-regulate currently? Because currently the self-regulation might be dropping to the floor. I mean, that is that in many cases a regulation strategy. It might be you know, twirling hair. It might be things that are socially stigmatizing or inhibiting that student to access curriculum or opportunities. So students that need self-regulation are probably finding ways now to do it. So how do we teach it so that it's more skillful? And what circumstances work best? When are the best times to use it? Is it right when you get to school, as Susan mentioned? Do we need to have an unconditional, meaning it's not contingent on the student's behavior, breaks throughout the day? And how often do we need those breaks where a student can engage in different types of self-regulation? You know, how often are these taught? Are we actually just teaching them or telling them, or are we actually teaching them, you know, as opposed to telling them? And are we modeling and using those co-regulation skills? Some pieces with co-regulation, just making sure, think about how close you are to those students when they're having a meltdown, because sometimes the closer we get, the more likely a student's actually going to act out and be aggressive. If they're upset, it's more like, just like any person, when they're upset and you get up in their personal space, you're putting yourself in a situation where they might act out, when if you back off, they may be able to calm down more quickly. Home base we talked about in terms of not a punishment, but where can the student go, and calming words. These are those magic statements I talked about earlier from Sherry Moyer's Eclipse model. I'll just lay them out really quick here. You know, it's just kind of, I understand you're upset. I'll help you figure this out when you're calm. Do you need more time? What can I do to help? And you wouldn't want to repeat those things over and over again, but just, I always like it when you can have a plan of what to do. Certainly including families is important in your discussions.
And that's part of that generalization piece as well.
Yes. And do you have any specific tips on how you've included families in the discussions of some of these pieces?
Well, I mean, any of the strategies that we're using, I make sure that the families, you know, have access to those strategies, that we've given the families instruction in how we have taught the child how to use them. Video modeling, like Daniel is saying, and, you know, excellent way so that the parents can implement those strategies at home.
I know that more and more people are using, for families that do have access to a computer technology, more and more people are able to share things through Dropbox technologies. You know, you always want to be careful about confidentiality and being careful with those pieces, but just, you know, there are definitely ways to communicate with families, make sure that the students' confidentiality is protected, and at the same way as getting releases to share videos and information so that everyone can see what's happening. I always include a slide of just some parent support organizations around Wisconsin, so if you're not familiar with these, you can find any of these online, and they help families in various ways. To wrap up, and then we're going to answer a couple questions, you know, self-regulation, I really try to tie for educators what you're listening to into other pieces of what you're already doing. We have mentioned PBIS and RTI throughout this. So in a solid response to intervention system that includes the behavior side of PBIS, you know, these things, if you can teach them universally to all students, or for a targeted student that needs more assistance, as their Tier 2 or Tier 3, that can be very effective. I would also say, you know, if you look at Wisconsin's guiding principles for teaching and learning, you know, this really, you know, that base understanding that students come in with different experiences, have a right to learn. You know, some of these students need the self-regulation to assist them. Certainly, and if you look at the Danielson framework and educative effectiveness, you know, managing classroom procedures and student behavior, self-regulation, again, a PBIS way to help students improve in their behaviors. And it also works in some of those areas and domains under instruction. So at this time, you know, we just kind of want to take in your questions. I'm not going to go through the rest of these slides just for sake of time, and maybe answer a couple questions. I have resource links here to the Autism Internet Module's website, and that's where you can get step-by-step instructions and implementation checklists as well for some of this information.
Okay, we have a question. Can you give an example of a bad way to teach the 5-point scale?
You know, examples. So I acknowledge the discrimination training. That's good, because what it is and what it's not. A bad way for me is maybe using the negatives. Don't do, in the hallways, don't yell. In the classroom, don't run around the classroom. It needs to be a positive behavior intervention. So that would be one way I can think of.
Exactly. And what they should do, all right, not just, I mean, what they need to do to self-regulate. I mean, not just quiet hands. I mean, I see that like quiet hands, I mean, because that's, you know, versus, you know, hitting hands. But if you have quiet hands, all right, what do they need to do to get quiet hands? I have some students, they might need to make lemonade, which means squeeze, you know, but we've taught them that. So again, you need to consider what self-regulation skill do they need to learn versus just basically stop the behavior.
Yeah, overuse of teacher language versus child language would certainly be, I don't know if it's the wrong way, but it's not the best way also, so what Susan said. So having the student be involved in that process, and also making sure it's something the student can do. So you're not going to put a regulation strategy in a student's 5-point scale that no one around the table thinks the student is likely to do at this point in time. That might be a goal in the future. It doesn't mean you don't teach it, but you really want to try to make sure that you're including things that are realistic that the student can engage in and have some likelihood of doing.
And another bad way would be if a 5-point scale isn't appropriate for that student. You know, maybe their concrete cognitive functioning level is a 5-point scale wouldn't be the best strategy, you know, to utilize, because I've had some folks, you know, with some students that are cognitively functioning at a very young level, they've tried to use a 5-point scale, and I'm like, you know, we just need to do basically maybe some regulated breathing, you know, or some, like Daniel had talked about, the progressive, you know, relaxation, because the 5-point scale, the way it's some folks have had it designed and set up, it might not, fit that student's needs. And again, individualizing, if they can't read and you've got all these written words on that 5-point scale, how are they going to utilize, it's like with any visual support, all right, making the visual support so that the student comprehends it, understands it.
And we've kind of said you definitely want to allow time to let things work, but if things feel like they're not working, you can make minor adjustments to them. You shouldn't abandon things entirely, but you can make adjustments and kind of look. If things are getting worse, you might, for certain interventions, you have to consider that. But if you don't see the improvement you're looking for, sometimes that's when you sit around and you problem solve. We had a question around, general education teachers not really knowing how to work with students with a lot of movement needs. Part of that is just community and culture, and my recommendation is to try to find some good videos and information and books about autism. Videos are great. Or the Organization for Autism Research, the video clip I showed, they have 4 videos that talk about autism for secondary teachers. And I know this is a kindergarten teacher, but those videos, I think, are great for any teacher. Because they talk about, especially the first video, talks about characteristics of autism. There's actually a video that talks about meltdowns and how teachers can identify meltdowns and ideas of what to do. The clip we saw was off of that video, I believe. But, I mean, it's just really, really, if you can find some resources like that, and I have a list of resources, feel free to email me.
MeMoves has great information. The AIMS website actually has a module on sensory processing differences, and they talk about the cumulative effects, of sensory processing differences. And they have it's a combination on that module. There's some videos, great videos that they share, and some case studies. Sometimes I have had, teachers let's just look through this module. It'll take you an hour, look through it, but that might give a better understanding of this sensory, / self-regulation piece.
Sometimes there's movies, too. The Temple Grandin movie is fantastic.
Oh, absolutely.
Retchers and Jabberers for students that are nonverbal and use communication devices. It's a story of 2 grown men that are traveling the world to talk about their communication differences and autism. It's a documentary. It's unbelievable. Autism Society had them come out and speak a couple years ago to Keynote, and they typed to speak, and you can just watch the trailer, and you're like, wow, I didn't know that people like that were able to do so many things. So getting people's minds changed around what is disability and what's possible can be extremely powerful. And I think using video, Good Friend Inc. is in Wisconsin. 2 parents of kids with autism have started this nonprofit organization, and they sell videos, very high-quality videos about peer sensitivity. They have a new one coming out soon that I got to preview at a statewide meeting we held recently, and it's phenomenal. It's Good Friend Inc., I-N-C, Wisconsin. I'll type that in the chat box for everybody. But if you go to their website, they come out to schools and talk to people as well. And they have some peer sensitivity videos about autism, and they also have a really great video by the figureheads online on YouTube. That's great.
Daniel, there's a question for you, because I don't know can you review for us where to access your Google Docs for this presentation?
Yeah, so I'll send that link out again here. So in the Google Drive, this is the Google Drive right here. And this is my drive, so this isn't what you're going to see. But there is going to be a folder called Self-Regulation. I'm just going to pull that link.
So if anybody's registered for this, they will have
everyone that is registered should have it, and I'm going to put it in the question box right now, just so you know this is what it looks like. So there's there's the growth and stress survey. It's the PowerPoint from today. And I wouldn't be surprised if I find some more things and kind of add to it over time. And then we had a question about how do you if there's a crisis, how do you co-regulate in a crisis? And there's a lot of answers to that. I mean, really, when you're dealing with someone who has and it depends on what you mean by crisis.
That's what I'm wondering.
But if you have a student who's being physically aggressive, that you really, it's going to be an IEP team decision if you're in a school-based setting. You really just need to have clear procedures of what you're going to do in certain situations. You know, when a student is harmful to themselves or others, if a student's about to run into a street, that might be a time when you may need to briefly restrain a student so that they do not hurt themselves. But if a student is just yelling and crying, then we need to think about, are the behaviors that we are doing stigmatizing the student? Are they lowering their self-esteem? Are they making the problem worse? Or are we saying things that recognize that the student is in pain and affirming that, which is relationship building? Are we doing things that de-escalate that student? And what that looks like is going to really depend on the student.
Absolutely.
But the relationship piece, when you have students that are in crisis often because of their neurology or their makeup, it's not easy, but how we respond to that, you can really destroy a relationship. And if you don't have that relationship, it's hard to rebuild.
And that's where, again, some of the like the nonviolent crisis intervention training, some of those trainings talk a lot about that, about restoring, rebuilding the relationship, not destroying it, using the PBIS. So, if I have students that are in crisis, that can go into a crisis mode, we certainly want to make sure we have folks that are trained in some of those nonviolent crisis intervention. And then there's some of the other ones. I know in Wisconsin we primarily use nonviolent crisis intervention training. But again, it depends on how you're defining crisis. And I think that varies from team to team, actually.
Yep. Well, thank you all so much. Please take the follow-up survey. Your suggestions, I do look at these kind of en masse throughout the year, and they are helpful. If you have questions, I'm sure there will be, I will be going back to all of these surveys over the summer as well to help me plan for next year's round of webinars. So please, please, please fill out the survey when you receive it. You can follow up with any questions. Susan, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
This was fun.
It was.
And thank you to everyone who was with us. And we will see you next time. Take care.